We're here almost on the other side. And I'm Mitchell, and on behalf of everyone at Books and Books, all of us here, this is one of the happiest days that we've had over the last number of years. So thank you all for that. You know, our relationship with FIU runs very, very deep. And with that relationship came Nick, and our relationship with Nick runs very, very deep. And I want to thank Nick for making this his book launch. Thank him for all of what he just gave us outside. Thank you, Nick, for all of that as well. And I could never do anything here that had anything to do with FIU without bringing up my good friend, and that's Les Stanford. Give Les a big round.
Thank you, Mitchell. It is a mutual admiration society, too, I should say. Really a great pleasure to be up here tonight for this event. And before I get into that, I should say this is not the first time that FIU has had a partnership with the publisher of this, in this particular case. Michael Zealy published another book by an FIU alum when back, don't want this to be sad, but we had an alum who published his first novel, published his thesis novel. Dan Wakefield and I had been the director. We're talking about Tony Gagliano. Book did well, and he was working hard on a second novel. He was having trouble getting it published, and we were talking to him about it. And he was working hard, and I don't know how many drafts he'd gone through on that, working on that book. And all of a sudden, I get a phone call from his wife. Tony passed this morning, heart attack, age 56, I think it was. Dan and I were talking about, what are we going to do about that book? That book was good. It was almost there. He was almost finished. How much work do you think is left, Dan? Before you know it, we took the manuscript and finished it between the two of us, sent it back and forth. And Michael Zealy took a look at it and said, I'll publish The Emperor's Club. And still in print, as far as you know. Not only was that a wonderful thing for him to do, I only mention this because there might be some of our students here, and I bring this up as an example of how much do we stand behind you, even if you die. But The Emperor's Club's a good thriller, and you ought to take a look at it. Tony Gagliano.
The Seagull's wife, one of our graduates, I can't remember her last, Elaine Weiner.
Elaine
He
Weiner.
published hers, and she had passed away, and Michael published her as well.
You're still alive. You don't have to lie.
Okay.
Tony's original publisher would have published that second book if he had gotten it finished, but in mystery publishing, they view authors more or less as milk cows, and they're basically interested in you if they think you're going to turn out about a book a year. Well, with Tony gone, they didn't see much advantage in it, so leave it to Michael to step up. And anyway. Of course, I'm always happy to introduce my colleague, not only a wonderful writer, but an equally wonderful human being, John Dufresne, author of some 20 books, including novels. He's also a playwright, also a screenwriter, and also four books, textbooks, 4 or 5? Four books about how to do it, including the recent Storyville. And also very fond of his series of detective novels were set in Las Vegas, featuring a detective by the name of Wile E. Coyote. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. pleasure to have worked with him these many years. And another kick to be introducing my former advisee, who there's a line at the beginning of the book, I hope I'm not taking his thunder here, in which he says, somebody wondered if any of this had been embellished. This story could not have possibly been embellished. And if you read it, you'll see what I mean. From the moment I read the first pages, I said, boy, this kid has got something. This book is going to be a slam dunk. Well, of course, I suppose that's always the curse that you place upon a manuscript, because we sent that book out, and Nick worked, and he worked some more, and then he worked some more after that. And I know in his heart of hearts, because I've been there in the same place, he began to wonder. It was Les shining me on just because we liked each other. It's just a bunch of BS. And I said, no, Nick, you have heart. And so it's a particular thrill to be up here tonight saying that it finally happened. Congratulations, Mike. That's all about, and that's enough for me. You come on up.
I have trouble with electronics. If you believe in your work and you persevere, if you are not fazed by failure or discouraged by rejection, if you understand that failure is a step on the way to success, if you realize that rejection is an opportunity to revise and that revision is the heart of writing, then you may find yourself, after 10 years of trying, with a wild, compelling memoir that is as funny as it is sobering, making its way in the world of books so good you want to throw a party for it. So that's what we're doing tonight here at Books and Books. Here's the man who persevered, Nick Garnett. Let me tell you a little bio. Nick got his MFA in creative writing, as you know, in 2011. But he was a two-time recipient of the school's literary awards in nonfiction. He taught creative writing at FIU, the Miami Book Fair, Writing Class Radio. He's the co-producer of the Miami-based live storytelling series Lip Service, True Stories Out Loud. Let's hear it for Lip Service. He's the recipient of writing residencies from the Vermont Studio Center and the Woodstock Birdcliff Guild, and fellowships to the Norman Mailer Art Colony, Writers in Paradise. His writing has appeared, among other places, in Salon.com, the Florida Book Review, TrueHumor.com, and anthologized in sundry publications, Best of the Net and Best Sex Writer.
We're not invited.
I'm going to ask Nick to open up this reading/conversation by reading the preface to the book.
I'm only moving here because I'm being officious, but because I can read from here. Well, first of all, before I read anything, I have to take a moment. Because though I'm a generally optimistic person, and I'd like to think that I may have another book in me, and that there might be another launch someday. That may not happen, and so that's one possibility. But even if it does, it will never be the first time. So I'm just taking a moment to take this all in. Yeah, as John said, it took a long time, and all of the things that he said that I didn't do in terms of being discouraged.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
In terms of being discouraged, I was. In terms of never giving up, I did. I did all of those things. But if there's any advantage to being a writer coming to it later in life, it's that you've pretty much tried everything else and you know that nothing else is going to work. So you just keep going because there's nothing else to do. There's no going back. And tonight is just extraordinary, really, for me. A dream. All right, here's the preface. It's very short, it's just a page. And it asks you to do this. Imagine the tribal mysticism of Stonehenge, the spectacle of gladiator night at the Colosseum, the debauchery of a sex tour of Bangkok, the constancy and connectedness of a family reunion, the percussive force of a Gene Krupa drum solo, the endurance of 24 hours of Oman, the explosive joy of VJ Day, the rush and some of the risk of cliff diving in Acapulco, and the transformative power of a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. This was life as a straight, married man in the gay circuit party scene. Or at least it was to me. If the metaphors I use to describe the circuit appear to contradict each other, it's for good reason. They reflect the enigmatic nature of the circuit party phenomenon. Since their inception in the 1980s, these events have raised millions of dollars for various HIV/AIDS medical research and social support organizations. The circuit has helped save lives and has provided comfort and dignity to those with AIDS who could not be saved. The circuit has also provided the perfect setting for exactly the kind of behavior that spread the disease in the first place. And that qualifies as A1 top shelf irony. And as Les said, though the story recounts actual events, I've changed certain details, including names and occupations, for reasons that will become very obvious. But there was, however, no attempt and no need to tweak up the story. Anyone who has lived this life can vouch for the fact that the very last thing it needs is embellishment. Thank you, Nick.
So Nick, this is, as you heard, partly a story, a memoir of a straight guy who, whoa, you gonna use that one? For me?
We only got one that works. Anyway, I don't know. But anyway,
So my question for Nick is, it straight guy, ends up in the gay world, the circuit world, which when you read the book, you find all about it. Amazing and almost unreal place. What attracted you to this world?
yeah, I mean, part of me wants to say it takes 275 pages to explain that. But actually, I think I can boil it down. I was 34 years old when this starts. I was at a place in my life where I felt lost. Didn't know what I wanted to do next, what I should do next with my life. And into that world, I mean, it's a little bit like a film noir or a noir story in which the guy is sort of disconnected and lost and literally sitting at the bar, and in walks somebody and he thinks he has found himself. That somebody was my ex-wife, Rachel, in the book, and through her she introduced me to her friends, who were almost all gay. Some of them are in this room.
I thought there might be some characters.
So why was I so attracted and so comfortable about it? Well, part of it is the way I grew up. My mother, after she divorced my dad, became very skeptical and cynical when it came to men. And so she surrounded herself with the kind of men she could count on, the kind of men who idolized her, the kind of men who loved Billie Holiday and West Side Story and all the things that she loved. And so I grew up in the company of gay men. But it was more than that. I think that, looking back on this story, that what I was looking for was something that we are all looking for. And that is a place to belong. A place to say, oh, this is my place in the world. This is who I am. And I think it's what's behind a lot of movements, civil rights movements, identity movements. It's that place where you think you have found myself. And I thought that was where I belonged, with this woman and these guys who were everything that I wasn't at the time. Confident, successful. And Julie Wade, who is one of the multitudes of people who I owe such a... If I started thanking all the people that I should thank about this book getting published, it'd be time to go. So I'm just going to mention some of them. Julie Wade, who's one of the people that read this, said, this isn't so much a story about sexuality, this is a story about class and thinking that you're moving up in the world. And it was as much that, because these people were extremely ambitious and successful. And I wasn't used to that. So I thought, and we were having a fucking good time. There was that.
Yeah, in fact, when you did meet her in a bar, as I remember in the opening, sitting in a bar in Washington, D.C., right? Sort of with lobbyists and consultants all over the bar, and she takes you home.
Yeah, that did happen.
Yeah.
And she was a former work colleague, and we thought we were getting together for just catching up for a drink. And 12 years later, in a flash of an eye, I had never imagined that that's where my life was headed when I met her.
You mentioned your mother and your mother's friends, and sort of introduced you to this world. Do you want to read a little part about your mother?
Sure. It's actually, to my great surprise, I guess when you put a creative work out there, I've heard comedians say that you never know exactly what part of your bit is going to get the laugh. And I had no idea. It's actually, of all the people in this story, it's my grandmother that seems to come off the most beloved. People will say, I love your grandmother, and she was a holy terror. I did not intend to portray her that way. And it was really my grandmother that started this whole ball rolling, and I'll just read you a little bit about her. In my world, the women have controlled the chess moves, beginning with my grandmother, the Grand Master. Anna, a once beautiful woman with brilliant emerald green eyes, had turned the head of many men in Athens, including my grandfather, a slender, genteel bank manager, educated in Vienna and fluent in 3 languages. After World War II, he was hired by the U.S. State Department's Voice of America, a fledgling government agency with the mission to broadcast the truth and the light of democracy to the unenlightened masses of the world. In 1948, my grandmother and their 3 children, including my then 14-year-old mother, Persephone, boarded a cruise ship for America. They left the life of old world comfort, which included maids, piano lessons, and French tutors, to join my grandfather in Mount Rainier, Maryland, a nondescript middle-class neighborhood just outside of Washington, D.C., one commensurate with his government salary. My grandmother, the product of a spoiled upbringing, courtesy of a doting father, never forgave her husband for ripping her from her beloved Athens and plunging her into America, whose social egalitarianism and nose to the grindstone work ethic she viewed as boorish and beneath her. She spent the rest of her years, all 40 of them, getting even by employing an effective combination of utter helplessness and absolute intimidation. This is the woman that everyone loves. Here's just a quick list of the people that were on her hate list. The Turks, the Jews, black people, Americans, except for Jerry Lewis, whose manic physical comedy made her laugh, and Kirk Douglas, whose rugged good looks made her swoon, oddly, both of whom were Jewish. Any president after John Kennedy, or for that matter before, my grandfather's side of the family, the military junta that ruled Greece from 1967 to 1974, Henry Kissinger, whose adherence to realpolitik led to U.S. support of the aforementioned, the CIA, Israel, see the Jews, American food, where she might have had a point, American music, and come to think of it, just about any person, place, or thing with origins that could not be traced back to Greece. And she'd often punctuate her curses with the Greek gesture of derision, the palm-out swat of the hand, the muja, which she employed using to unsuspecting Americans who, thinking she was saying hello, would often wave back to her. This was my grandmother, and her effect on the family was that all of her kids got out of Dodge as soon as they possibly could. Her influence on me, I emerged from adolescence imbued with the attributes of both the spoiled and the abused child. I lacked resilience and initiative, yet I had a strong sense of entitlement. I was self-conscious, unconfident, easily discouraged, reticent, and immensely fearful of confrontation. I wasn't competitive enough to win, and yet I hated to lose. Though I got decent grades, I drifted, disengaged through high school and college. I had few close friends, drank some, did drugs, smoked pot, dropped acid, tried cocaine, but no more than anyone else seemed to be doing at the time. Well, okay, maybe a little. So, that's who I was, and I end that chapter by saying it was safe to say I wasn't exactly at the top of my game. Hell, I didn't even know the name of the game at which I was failing. All I knew was there had to be something bigger and better out there if I could just figure out a way to find it. Turns out it found me.
Thank you. So Rachel and friends invited you into this world, a new world, the world of the straight world, the circuit, partying, etc. And you were very comfortable there. And did you ever question your own sexuality during any of this?
Not in the way that you're probably asking. In other words, I was never conflicted in terms of who I was attracted to. And I always say that if I had been, I think our friends would have sniffed that out, and they would not have been as accepting to me as they were. So my sexuality was never in question, but I tell you what I did have, and I've named it in the book. I call it Genvy. G''ENVY, right?
Yeah.
Gay envy. Gay envy. I really envied these guys. I wanted to be what they were and have what they had and be so confident and successful. So to answer the question, I never questioned my sexuality in that way, which would actually, I think, made me become even more immersed in that world.
What was with sort of kind of a follow-up about that, like your reception, you're characterizing the gay characters in the gay world in this, you know, which was honest, of course. No, did you worry at any? What's the hardest thing about writing this book? The hardest aspect of writing about this world and these people?
Okay, here's an anecdote. When I had finished about 3 chapters of this, I thought I was writing a tell-all. It was going to be, you know, a behind-the-scenes look at a particular kind of lifestyle. I knew it was unusual. I knew maybe even unique, my experience. So I started writing things down. And I spent the summer after Rachel and I split up in Provincetown, an amazing place. As Ray, I'll say, is in the front row here. Ray can tell you, a remarkable place. I spent the entire summer there. Above me was a writer. His name was Kevin Sessoms, and he had just gotten a contract to do his memoir called Mississippi Sissy. Great name. And I got up the nerve to show him my pages. I'd never even had the opportunity to have somebody read my stuff. I gave it to him, and he said, I'll take a look at it. So for the next 3 or 4 days, I watched him through the Venetian blinds as he's pacing up and down. It was horrible. Watching him, he had a cigarette in one hand, he's got my manuscript in the other. And I'm waiting for him. So finally he calls me upstairs. And he was a brusque kind of guy. And come on in. So he gives me a cocktail and a joint and tells me to sit down. And I think, oh, I need a cocktail and a joint? This is going to be... So he says, I read it. He says, here's the thing. He says, the good news is you can write. The bad news is you're not a writer yet. And I had no idea what he was talking about, but then he went on to explain what he meant was, you've got a facility with the language, you can describe things, I see it, you know, you put us in this, in the scene, it's very vivid. He says, I have no idea who you are in this story. I have no idea why it is that I should be reading this. And he said, your job is going to be as honest and hard on yourself as you are as anybody else in here. We have to see you, this story filtered through you. And that was, I hated that advice at the time, but it was absolutely true. And it took years for me to be able to look back on that story, put it in context, figure out what it was that the reason, Les Stanford always has this at the end of his list. How do you assess a story? Well, you get to the end and you say, well, why should I give a shit about this? Why am I reading this? Why should I care? And that was the hardest part.
There's a point before you and Rachel part ways, and before we go apart now, when you arrive, we'll bring it local here now. When you arrive in Miami Beach, did you read that section when you come here?
Sure. You have to understand, this was November of 1991. Miami Beach was not what it is now. And so here I was, only with her maybe a month when we came down here, and she took me to 12th Street. I don't know, is 12th Street Beach still a thing?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think it was this thing, though. Here we are in November 1991, Boy Beach. We stood at the edge of the beach at Ocean Drive at 12th Street, and for as far as I could see in both directions, bright umbrellas lined the pale sand, set under multicolored kites which hovered above, and lifeguard stands, sprouting odd jutting angles. Strung along the length of Ocean Drive was a row of pastel-colored hotels which gleamed in the shimmering sun. And before me lay South Beach, its star in full ascent. spectacular and surreal, a crazy mashup of leggy models and muscle boys and hustlers, hipsters, striding down Ocean Drive past inscrutable old Jewish ladies in their saggy knee-high stockings, sitting on cheap lawn chairs outside their rundown hotels. We cross the sand to where two large rainbow flags sit on tall poles snapped in the breeze. They were obvious but unnecessary territorial boundary markers. Everyone was very much on display, preening, their bathing suits adjusted just so, their eyes busy scanning and assessing as they sipped their cocktails. Boomboxes belted out bass-heavy 4/4 beats. Men bounced from group to group like buff, beautiful frogs on lily pads made of sand. The purposeful flirting reminded me of the college mixers I'd gone to with my frat friends, minus the belching, the stale beer, and the puking in the backseat of my car. It was as though I had been allowed inside one of those fantastic Fifth Avenue department store displays at Christmas time. I felt out of sorts, but not out of place. So, thank you.
You've obviously, as we know, kept in touch with some of the people in this book. And are there any who did not want you to keep in touch?
There are some that I
you
just,
chose?
Well, there's a few that I chose not to stay in touch with. First and foremost, I guess we need to address the, not the 1,000-pound gorilla, but the 110-pound brunette in the room next to Rachel. She and I, the last scene in this book is the last time I saw her, and that's 15 years ago. I chose to reach out to some people when I knew this was getting published. She was not one of them. And I got advice both ways. I got advice, you got to talk to her, you got it. And other people said, don't you dare. Don't, one of my friends said, do not poke the bear.
Yeah.
Don't poke the bear. So, but there are people that I'm not sure how they feel about the way they were portrayed, honestly, because I haven't heard from them, and I don't know how to interpret that.
That they haven't bought the book yet. That's it.
Maybe so.
But did you worry during any of this? So we're all aware of cultural appropriation. And here you are, a straight guy writing about the gay world. Did you worry about any possible controversy about what you wrote and what people might think about you?
Yes,
Okay.
I did worry about it.
Yeah.
And but look, there were years when I thought this would never see the light of day, so what did I care? But then when it became, when it was going to be published, all of a sudden all these things occurred to me that I'd be opening myself up for that kind of criticism. And look, it's legitimate. It's legitimate. The only thing I'll say is that I did not approach this story as a sociologist. I was not trying to analyze the state of gay culture in the 90s. All I was doing was telling my story and my reaction to what I saw. And so I can be judged on that, but I really was not trying at all to write a sociological sort of examination of gay culture in the 90s. So I think, if people can legitimately criticize me for that, but the story is the story. It's on the pages of the book. I stand by it, and I wrote it in the best way I knew how.
Do you miss that life? Do you miss living that world? Are there any things about that life, that world, that you miss?
Well, look, I think we all get nostalgic sometimes about maybe being younger and hotter, and there were wonderful, joyful experiences, and there was the dark side. There was the dark side of Rachel, and there was the dark side that came from, I mean, you can't talk about this story without talking about the drug use. The drugs were as big a part of this scene as the disco balls. The interesting thing is that I think in 12 years, I maybe had 12 cocktails in there. Like, alcohol was not a part of this world, but drugs definitely were. And the downside of that was that it was an unsustainable kind of life. You could not keep going like that.
Yeah, the character Hector, and it's speaking of the druggers who seem to have destroyed his life during this. Have you followed up with Hector? Or?
He was one of the people I felt obligated to follow up with, and so I did reach out to him. He was spiraling down in this book, and this is a guy that had it all. I mean, he was the director of a major AIDS clinic at about the age of 35. He was internationally known in the AIDS research community, and we saw him spiraling down. After this book ends, he really hit rock bottom. He lost everything. He lost his medical license. He made the cover of New York Magazine about 7 or 8 years ago, the latest victim of AIDS. This was a drop-dead gorgeous guy back in the day, and he looked like a ghost of himself on the cover there. So I reached out to him. I didn't know how he would feel about being portrayed this way, and it turns out that he went to federal prison for dealing for 3 years and came out and was reformed and in the recovery community, and he could not have been more wonderful. He took no issue with me writing about him, and he, wished me the best. No, he deserves it for pulling himself out of the abyss.
We're going to give you time shortly for questions and answers and all that. So, but just maybe is it one more section you'd like to read?
Wow. Yeah. I'll read one more. And I like that this is more of a conversation here. All right, sit down. Reading. Okay. All right. Okay. I need to read this part. This is, I'm going to read the part, then I'm going to tell you why it's significant. This takes place in Fire Island. Rachel, a dozen or so gay men, and I stood by Dr. Hector's poolside jacuzzi on Fire Island and watched Jason and Mandy, who were two straight personal trainers. We got the brilliant idea that we would bring them to Fire Island with us because, hey, wouldn't it be fun to bring some more straight people into this scene? And wouldn't that be great? So they're in the hot tub. We're watching them. It was sex, but it wasn't particularly sexy. More Animal Planet than Spice Channel. Mandy had braced herself against the edge of the blue fiberglass tub, her ropey black hair spilling down in front of her, except for the thick band Jason had gathered in both fists. With each of his thrusts, a swell of water cascaded over the lip of the tub to the deck below. The sound of water slapping wood blended with a couple staccato rasps and grunts to form an oddly syncopated rhythm. It was pretty slick groove, actually, somewhere between bossa nova and Barry White. The faces on the men gathered around the couple were rapt. Who could blame them? This was at least as good as any porn movie, and it was the real thing, and it involved a hot straight man with huge muscles and tattoos. I turned to Rachel, and she gave me a different take. Annoyance. Trevor, one of our friends, who had warned us not to go to Fire Island, had been wrong about Fire Island. It was more. Much more. The place was as over the top as William Shatner reciting Shakespeare. Narrow boardwalks wound through pine forests and connected the houses together like a yellow brick road. Trees reverberated with the clickety-clack of big men pulling little red wagons full of groceries and luggage to and from the ferry terminal. There were miles of desolate sand dunes and achingly beautiful seagrass-lined beaches. But all that bucolic splendor was just a setup for what this place was really all about. Bug-eyed excess, where a summer share set you back the cost of a 3-bedroom Rambler in Paducah. Huge, lavish parties, smaller, yet more lavish parties, social climbing galore, one-upsmanship, balls to the wall, 24/7. This is where the story comes off the rails, as you might imagine. And the reason I read this is because about 9 years ago, at this event called Lip Service, a live reading, some of you here are alumni of this. I read an essay that was spun off of this book that began just the way I started it here, and it goes on and becomes even more outrageous. Before I went up on stage that night, I told the producer of the show, Andrea Askowitz, I said, this story will guarantee that I was single at the time, that I never meet another woman as long as because what woman out there would hear this story and then take a chance on a guy like me? Well, there's a few weird things. First of all, I was wearing this exact same shirt at that event. And secondly, in the audience was a woman that I met at the after party right out there at the bar. Her name is Denise, and she's my wife. And to this day, I have no idea. And if you ask her, I'm not sure she has a good idea of what kept her from running for the exits that night.
As I remember, when I first read the manuscript, that's how the book opens.
That's right.
And you and I talked, and I said, maybe we ought to work our way up to that. And one thing, I was just thinking as Nick was reading, like my experience of reading the book, I read a few things. The most haunting part of this book for me is after the party's over and you're in Provincetown by yourself going, it is beautiful. It's gorgeous and it's sad, and you mentioned nostalgic and all that. It's just lovely. And questions for our author. I can't see anybody, so. Anybody have a question?
Yeah, I have one.
Yes.
I feel like sometimes, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. I feel like sometimes you set the scene with music instead of like setting the scene with the landscape or something like that. Like, do you draw into a music background? Where did you learn how to do that?
Well, my dad, who still lives in Washington, D.C., was a lounge singer. So I grew up exposed to music all the time, mostly like Great American Songbook. And then later on I started playing the drums, and I played in various musical groups after that. So music was part, but music, I mean, this story begs for some kind of multimedia hybrid, because music, the club music of the day that came out of, house music out of Detroit and Chicago in the early 80s, and a version of which became really popular here in Miami back in the day. I mean, Miami in the 90s was really an epicenter for the scene that's portrayed in here. The clubs here were like nothing else. I mean, these places, the DJs would simply, you'd walk through the door and they would slam you against the wall, and they had you for the next 6, 8, 10, 12 hours, depending how good the drugs were. But it wasn't just the drugs. It was it was that music, and it was a primal, tribal kind of. It just was insidious, you know. And whenever I hear it, like, you know, sometimes you can hear it. Of course, you can't recreate that, but it does take me back to a particular time and place. And so, if that feels musical to you, then I appreciate it. Like, I feel like I did, like what I was trying to do, which is try to create that with words, which is really hard to do. You know.
Any other questions? Yes.
How did you pick the cover of the book, and what does it represent to you?
Okay, this is one of the multitudes of people I need to thank. Lou, where are you? Lou Lozano, are you still here? Anyway,
Yes, back there.
there he is. Okay, this guy right here. He did a lip service. I began co-producing the show several years ago. Lou was a storyteller. And when I found out the book was going to be published, I had a picture that I had taken many, many years ago of like somebody looked like a drag queen had thrown their platform shoes around a power line. And I took a picture and I put it out there thinking that might be the cover of the book. And Lou saw it and said, hey, he said, I see what you're trying to do. He says, why don't you let me take a look at that? And he is the one that designed this cover that so many people love. This happens to be my shoe, the dirty sneaker. And this says something about Denise. That's Denise's shoe. But Lou designed this, shot it. I'm really grateful to him. So thank you.
I've got one. So you went back later in life with Denise to be a Norman Mailer Fellow in Provincetown. And what were your feelings coming back to a place that you had experienced in a totally different way, and now coming in through a literary community? Plus, why don't you come back every year?
Yeah, the second part of that question is I can't quite answer that question. It's not because I don't love Provincetown and wish that I could do that every year. And I intend to go back soon. I hope this summer. Yeah, so Provincetown, this is really an interesting juxtaposition, right? I had experienced Provincetown in this sort of party scene, loved the place, connected to it in many, many ways. Then that life ended. I became serious about writing this book. I was accepted into the Mailer workshop, and they provided us housing. Just incredible. This beautiful place off of Commercial Street. And Denise and I, we were engaged, maybe. We definitely weren't married yet. And so I brought her along. She had never been to Provincetown. So here I am in this place that I experienced a certain way, in a sort of a very literary kind of a scene, around Mailer's table, and we're workshopping stuff in a serious way. The event was over a time period in Provincetown called Carnival. I don't know if any of you know what Carnival is. It's like their Mardi Gras. So here was the literary set up against this. People are out on the street all day long. So I remember being around the table and we're workshopping stuff, and I hear the thumpity, thumpity, thump, thump. And I said, oh, that's the parade coming down the street. And a friend who with connections had put Denise in the parade, so that I said, let's go outside, let's go outside and see. And we come down, and here comes the float, and here is Denise not wearing much, sandwiched between like two really hot like lesbians, and I said to them, that's my fiance right there. So yeah, Provincetown is everything. Provincetown is a mix of, I think it's the best, in some ways the best of everything. And talk about an accepting place where you feel like you can belong, that is Provincetown. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Did you ever think about fictionalizing the experience? And if so, like, or why did you choose memoir as opposed to fiction?
I certainly considered it. I was advised many, many times against it because, I don't know, I think partly because the story is unique. And you know, after I thought that this was never going to get published, I went on and wrote a novel that has some of the same themes in it, different setting, different characters, but that was my fictionalized version of this. But I think I would have been doing the story a disservice. And actually, I don't think it ever would have been published because as a novel, because I don't think anybody would have believed it.
Yes.
What about the movie?
Thank you. It took me like 15 years to get this sucker published. You know, let's one thing at a time. I know a lot of people ask me about that, and you know, who knows? Who knows? You know, have I imagined who would play me? My dream is Christian Bale. Way hotter than me, but you know, you gotta punch up.
Got a question? Yes.
Yeah, so you talked about the fact that you were pretty accepted socially. Did it affect you in your professional life at all, too? Because it sounds like you were with a lot of the A-list people, and I know they have a lot of good connections. And how did that affect you professionally?
Yeah, this was definitely a part of it. Is part of the attraction is that everyone was very ambitious and successful, and we started. Rachel and I started a business that became actually quite successful, and she had no use for children but loved dogs. And we started Washington, D.C.'s first doggy daycare center, and it became quite successful. So, yeah, that was definitely a part of it. It opened my eye. I was never terribly ambitious before, but it opened my eyes to what was possible.
And Nick was Santa Claus to the dogs during the holidays. And
Bad Santa.
yeah,
Bad Santa.
dogs didn't like it. Well, listen, thank you all for coming, and let's give Nick a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is literally a dream come true. There are so many people here that I am so grateful to. John Dufresne for editing this, Les Standerford for changing my life, Lynn Barrett for being on my thesis committee, the people who have read it and commented on it, Mitch Kaplan, who has done everything for the literary community here, Lizette Mendez, who puts together the program for the Miami. All of these people, I've literally been privileged to meet and associate with, and most of all, my wife, for putting up. It cannot be easy to have to deal with a past relationship and previous romance and exploits on the page and having to talk about them and write about them all the time. And she is my biggest advocate. So thank you.
And I would like to thank all of you for coming tonight as well. And the night's not over. Please go out into the courtyard and enjoy yourselves. And Nick will be signing around the corner in the other room. and buy the book by the tens. Anyway, thank you all for coming. We'll see you.
Thank you.